Donald Trump, when history refused to close the book. As time passed, something became increasingly clear to historians, journalists, and political observers alike. Donald Trump was no longer just a former president navigating life after power. He had become a case study, one that challenged traditional assumptions about leadership, legitimacy, and the nature of authority in the modern age. In earlier centuries, power was rooted in crowns, armies, or institutions. In the 20th century, it shifted toward ideology and mass movements. But in the era Trump helped define, power evolved again, toward attention. Trump understood attention instinctively. He did not rely on subtlety or nuance. He relied on repetition, confrontation, and emotional immediacy. His presence dominated discourse not because it was always persuasive, but because it was impossible to ignore. This was not accidental. Trump's entire career, long before politics, was built on the principle that visibility equals leverage. In business, in television, and later in governance, he operated under the same rule. If everyone is talking about you, you are winning. Historians began to trace this pattern backward, recognizing that Trump's presidency was not an abrupt departure from his past, but its logical conclusion. He governed as he marketed, he campaigned as he branded, he resisted accountability as he resisted failure. In this sense, Trump did not simply enter politics, he reshaped it around himself. The post-presidency years revealed something even more striking. Trump's influence did not diminish with the loss of office. In some ways, it intensified. Without the constraints of governance, he returned to his natural state, a permanent challenger, unbound by institutional responsibility. This raised uncomfortable questions. What happens when a democracy produces a figure who thrives more outside power than within it? What happens when grievance becomes more effective than governance? Trump's continued relevance suggested that the traditional life cycle of political authority, rise, rule, retirement, no longer applied. Instead, politics entered a loop. Every controversy fed the narrative, every investigation reinforced loyalty, every criticism became proof of opposition. For supporters, Trump's persistence signaled strength. For critics, it signaled erosion. But for historians, it signaled transformation. The system had changed. Trump did not dismantle democratic institutions outright. He tested their limits, publicly, repeatedly, and without apology. Courts held, elections proceeded, transitions occurred, and yet something intangible weakened: shared trust. Trust in outcomes, trust in facts, trust in the idea that disagreement did not equal betrayal. Trump's rhetoric reframed loss as theft, opposition as enemy, and compromise as surrender. These ideas did not disappear when his presidency ended. They lingered, embedded in language and expectation. Future leaders noticed. Some imitated his style, others rejected it openly, but none could ignore it. Trump had expanded the boundaries of what was considered politically possible. This is how historical influence often works, not through permanence, but through precedent. Trump proved that charisma could overpower experience, that outrage could outperform policy, that loyalty to a person could eclipse loyalty to institutions. And once proven, these lessons could not be unlearned. As years went on, historians increasingly viewed Trump not as an isolated phenomenon, but as a reflection of deeper forces: economic dislocation, cultural acceleration, the collapse of shared narratives in the digital age. Trump did not create these forces, he weaponized them. The speed of information, the fragmentation of media, and the rise of algorithm-driven attention all favored figures who could provoke instant reaction. Trump mastered this environment, not through strategy alone, but through instinct. He spoke in fragments, slogans, and absolutes, perfectly suited for an era of shortened attention spans and emotional engagement. In this sense, Trump was not behind the times. He was ahead of them. This realization unsettled many historians. It suggested that Trump's rise was not a deviation, but an early signal, a warning of what modern power could become when narrative outruns structure. As decades pass, Trump's personal fate, legal outcomes, electoral results, reputational shifts will matter less than the cultural footprint he leaves behind. History rarely remembers leaders exactly as they saw themselves. It remembers what changed after them. After Trump, political language grew sharper. After Trump, truth became contested terrain. After Trump, visibility itself became a form of authority. Future generations will debate whether he strengthened democratic participation by mobilizing disengaged voters or weakened democracy by undermining shared legitimacy. They will argue whether he represented neglected voices or exploited them. But they will agree on one thing: the era he shaped cannot be undone. Trump's story forces history to confront a difficult reality. Systems are only as strong as the collective belief in them. When belief fractures, rules alone cannot hold. And perhaps this is the most enduring lesson of Donald Trump's rise. Not that one man changed history, but that history revealed how fragile it already was. In the end, Trump may not be remembered solely as a president, a businessman, or a provocateur. He may be remembered as a turning point. A moment when the past collided with the future, when old institutions met new forms of power, when history stopped pretending it was settled. And as with all unfinished chapters, the final judgment remains suspended, waiting not just on Trump himself, but on what comes after. Because history does not close its books easily. Some stories remain open, veiled by noise, shaped by memory, and still unfolding. Donald Trump, when the echo became the story. As the years stretched on, something subtle but profound occurred. Donald Trump was no longer merely a contemporary figure debated in real time. He began to drift into a different category, one reserved for figures whose presence outlives their position. History recognizes this transition. It is the moment when a person stops being judged only by actions and starts being studied as a phenomenon. Trump's name became shorthand. It no longer required explanation. To some, it meant defiance. To others, disruption. To many, division. Rarely has a single surname carried such immediate emotional weight across so many audiences. This was not coincidence. Trump's influence endured because it was rooted less in ideology and more in identity. He did not ask followers to align with a detailed political philosophy. He asked them to align against something, against elites, against institutions, against change that felt imposed rather than chosen. History shows that movements built on opposition often last longer than those built on policy, because opposition feeds on grievance. And grievance, once activated, is difficult to extinguish. Trump's continued presence reshaped how power itself was perceived. Traditionally, authority flowed from office. Trump inverted this logic. He demonstrated that office could be temporary, but influence could be permanent, if sustained through attention, repetition, and emotional loyalty. This realization unsettled political theorists. It suggested that modern leadership might no longer depend on governing competence, but narrative dominance. The ability to command attention could rival or even surpass the ability to govern effectively. Trump did not govern quietly, he governed loudly, and when the governing stopped, the noise remained. In the years that followed, historians traced how Trump's rhetoric altered political behavior far beyond his immediate circle. Language hardened, accusations escalated, compromise became suspicious. Even politicians who opposed Trump adopted fragments of his style, shorter statements, sharper attacks, simplified messaging. Trump had shifted the center of gravity. This is how historical influence often works, not through direct control, but through imitation. Future leaders learned that outrage traveled faster than explanation, that certainty, even when unfounded, felt stronger than nuance, and that loyalty could be cultivated by framing disagreement as hostility. These lessons spread quietly long after the rallies faded. Meanwhile, Trump himself remained an active presence, shaping his own mythology. He spoke not as a former leader reflecting on history, but as a participant still fighting it. The past, in his telling, was never settled. Outcomes were provisional, judgments were reversible. This refusal to concede narrative space became one of his defining traits. History, however, does not negotiate. It absorbs. As time passed,